I will try to present to you shortly the basic facts and achievements of Vladimir's life. The Vavřínek family lived in the small village of Spytihně in eastern Moravia, a land of wooded hills, small agricultural farms, vineyards, and industrial enterprises, which had formed the stage of the Cyrillo-Methodian mission 1,000 years earlier. Vladimir's father, Josef, was born to a local farmer but aspired to a career of an engineer. The events of World War I soon forced him to abandon his plans. He joined the army, fought in Italy, and eventually worked on the railway as an engine driver. Vladimir's mother, Emilia, was from the historical city of Hradec Králové, situated in eastern Bohemia. Like many women of her generation, she was primarily concerned with taking care of her household and children. Vladimír was born in Hradec Králové on August 5, 1930. The family soon moved to the mining town of Karviná in the north of Moravia, where Josef found work with a railway company. Vladimír often visited his relatives in Hradec, where his aunt was a successful dressmaker and ran a popular fashion salon until the communist coup. The young boy enjoyed the bustle of the shop as he watched the seamstresses at work. When he tired of being indoors, Vladimír often went on long walks with his maternal grandfather, who entertained him with stories from Czech mythology and history, forging love of these subjects in the mind of the bright and impressionable child. Desiring a better education for their children, the family moved to Prague in the mid-1930s, settling in one of the suburbs of Prague called Kobylisy. From an early age, Vladimír was an avid reader. He attended the nearby Salesian Center, which possessed a great library. At the age of 9, he joined the Scouts. In 1939, his camp experience was interrupted when the German Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was established and its leaders disbanded all organizations and prohibited public gatherings. In his memoirs, Vavřínek recalled the feelings of injustice and anger that instilled in him a disgust for totalitarian regimes. The Vavřínek family, unlike so many others, survived World War II without major losses. The parents listened to forbidden radio stations. Josef traveled clandestinely to his native Moravia to buy food, and everyone knew what could not be said in public. Vladimír began his grammar school studies in the final year of war. It was a difficult time. One of his teachers was a Nazi collaborator and informant, and an esteemed Latin professor, Tots, was forced to leave the school. By 1945, the war was over, and Tots had returned, eager to help his students to catch up. Although he occasionally slapped them to improve their concentration, as Dr. Vavřínek put it, the professor was a great storyteller and would often interrupt his grammar explanations to give an impromptu lecture on various aspects of Roman history and culture. The post-war grammar school years were a fascinating time for a young man who loved jazz, new films, journals, and newspapers, and the theater, enjoyed classical music, and spent hours standing in the Rudolfinum Music Hall listening to concerts. Following the communist putsch in 1948, he began the final year of his grammar school studies and pursued his scholarly interests in ancient history. Despite his anti-communist views, he passed the entrance exams to enter university and was admitted to study history and archaeology. It was an ill-fated time to begin a university career, as many excellent scholars had been dismissed on political pretexts. Political pressure was particularly evident in the history department, where most professors were Marxists and factory workers turned students endeavored to spread the communist message among their peers. As archaeology was less connected with politics, there was more freedom. Nevertheless, Vladimir's heart was not in the discipline, and he eventually abandoned it. At the end of the first semester, he applied to study Latin, and passing the required exams, was admitted to the Department of Classical Studies. During Vavřínek's final year, his supervisor suggested the history of the Roman province Pannonia as the topic for his master's thesis. Uncertain as to what new information he could possibly add to the research, Vavřínek dared a counter-proposal, the uprising of Aristonikos, which was accepted enthusiastically by his teacher. But his life was not all books and learning. During a compulsory skiing trip in Erzgebirge Mountains in 1951, he met a lovely girl named Hannah. Despite their disparate interests, Hannah studied chemistry and was also interested in physics, whereas Vladimir was wont to recite poetry and discourse on history. They started dating. In June 1953, Vladimír Vavřínek was defending his thesis. Following the discussion of his work, he was examined by two scholars who specialized in the brutal occupation of Western Bohemia by the Americans, and very nearly failed, not being versed in the pseudo-history of communist Czechoslovakia. Vavřínek's thesis was recommended for publication, and the young man's military service was postponed so that he could prepare the manuscript. At the same time, he accepted a job in the Committee on Disbanding of Learned Societies, which was to sort through the archives of the various closed institutions and select documents for the new archive of the Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences. While the new work environment was agreeable, as Vladimir's co-workers also opposed the communist regime, the work itself was depressing. Decisions regarding what to discard were made haphazardly, resulting in the loss of valuable material. After the conclusion of the work, he received two offers, which would enable him to postpone his military service and work in the academia. His dilemma was quickly solved when, based on a reprimand from a professor at the Faculty of Arts, Vavřínek received a call-up order. That same evening, he and Hannah went to the theater to see Schiller's Treachery and Love, and at the end of a long night's walk, they decided to get married. The wedding took place 2 weeks later at the Old Town Hall and in the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Prague on 24th October 1953. The newlyweds spent 4 beautiful autumn days at Bechyně Chateau. On their return, Vladimir joined the army. He concluded his military service. Vavřínek worked briefly for a paper manufacturer as translator and a documentarist. Although separated from academia, there was a shimmer of hope. The Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, had criticized the Stalin regime, and the political ice was beginning to melt. Vavřínek began his doctoral studies and was assigned Christianization of Great Moravia as the topic of his thesis. We have the thesis here, and there are various other books that maybe you would like to look into during the coffee break. Although he protested that he knew nothing about Byzantium, which he actively despised based on Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, nor its literature, his objections were ignored. At the time, great archaeological discoveries in South Moravia were revealing the rich heritage of Great Moravia. Vladimir's task was to contextualize these findings using the testimony of the Byzantine sources and Old Church Slavonic literature. In 1961, he successfully defended his thesis and later began working at the Center for Greek, Roman, and Latin Studies, to which the Byzantine section of Slavonic Institute had been transferred in 1963. In 1966, Vavřínek received a fellowship at Dumbarton Oaks. He arrived at the Byzantinist haven accompanied by Professor Dvorník, who had waited for him at the airport. With an unrestricted access to the center's amazing book collection, Vavřínek spent his year reading. In July 1967, he returned to Europe, where he finally held his 7-month-old daughter, Monica. The 1960s were a time of change and opportunity in Czechoslovakia. In 1968, Vavřínek became the executive editor of Byzantino-Slavica and received an offer to travel to a medievalist workshop in Poitiers. Afterwards, he and Hannah spent 2 weeks in Provence. On August 21st, they were on a train from Geneva to Zurich. The man sitting across from them in their compartment was reading a newspaper with a large headline on the front page: Die Besatzung der TSSR um 4:40 Uhr beendet. In Zurich, Vladimír and Hannah discussed their situation. In the end, they decided to get their daughter and return to the West. They traveled to Vienna, from where they took a midnight train to Prague. As they thought about their aging parents and the siblings they would probably never see again, and the persecution their families would face on their behalf, their plans disintegrated. They could not leave. Vladimír Vavřínek's most important works at this time include a monograph on the Aristonicus uprising and on Alexander the Great, followed by studies dealing with aspects of the ecclesiastical missions in Great Moravia and the altered Slavonic lives of Cyril and Methodius, which brought new perspectives on their mission. During normalization, Vavřínek continued to work at the Center for Greek, Roman, and Latin Studies. By then, his scholarly work had attracted international attention, and he was able to conduct research in the UK, revisit Dumbarton Oaks, and lecture in Western Germany. He also organized 2 symposia in Prague. In the generally oppressive climate of the era, scholarly work offered a welcome reprieve. Vavřínek revisited the Aristonicus revolt, inquiring into the main protagonist's intentions and historical role. He also opposed the generally accepted opinion that liturgy in the vernacular was part of Byzantine missionary policy, highlighted the significance of Constantine's unprecedented literary input, and placed the Cyrillo-Methodian legends within the wider context of Byzantine hagiography. Vavřínek's career reached its zenith in the years following the Velvet Revolution. He became editor-in-chief of Byzantino-Slavica in 1990 and organized an international symposium at Bechyně Château titled Byzantium and Its Neighbors from the mid-9th to the 12th centuries. He traveled frequently, lecturing in the UK, US, Germany, Austria, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, to mention just a few. Despite his many successes, Vavřínek witnessed an intense situation at work, as Byzantino-Slavica, with its international reputation, was regarded with jealousy by its director. At that time, 2 of Vavřínek's colleagues proposed to renew the Institute of Slavonic Studies, which had achieved international renown in the interwar years. Their timing was inauspicious, as the Prime Minister, Václav Klaus, was not a supporter of the Academy of Sciences, and anything Slavonic was considered undesirable, being understood as reminiscent of the Russian dictatorship of the past decades. Despite these obstacles, the Institute of Slavonic Studies reopened on July 1st, 1992. Vavřínek was invited to join in and decided to accept. The first years of existence were not easy for the renewed institute. The fear that it could become a center of Pan-Slavism lingered. It was not economically independent, nor did it have a director. As the leaders of the institute wished for an international scholar, the choice fell to Professor Antonín Měšťan, a Polonist. His appointment was also not without complications, as he was teaching in Freiburg in Breisgau. For Vavřínek's 65th birthday, Václav Konzel and Růžena Dostálová prepared a collected volume in his honor, which was titled Stephanos. In the second half of the 1990s, the Institute of Slavonic Studies gradually entered a new era. The academic committee recognized it as an independent entity in 1997, and in the same year, Vavřínek was elected director. No longer stigmatized by his anti-communist views, Vavřínek launched an impressive teaching career, lecturing on Byzantine history and Byzantine Slavonic relations at Charles University in Prague, Masaryk University in Brno, and the CEU in Budapest. In his scholarly work, Vladimír turned his attention to a further cultural aspects of the Cyrillo-Methodian mission, presenting the creation of glagolitic script and literature for the Moravians as an original idea of Constantine. Vladimír also placed the lives of Constantine and Methodius within the context of Byzantine, as well as medieval hagiography, and pointed out that the texts were not primarily designed to celebrate Constantine and Methodius, but to defend and justify their work and to persuade Moravian rulers to protect the Slavonic liturgy within their realms. When Vladimír Vavřínek assumed the office of a director, conditions at the institute were deplorable. The fellows were using ancient typewriters, and the library was full of debris. The new director undertook the renovation of the premises and invited young, talented scholars to join. By the time he retired, 2 international evaluations had acclaimed his leadership, and the scholarly output of the institute, which by then was publishing its own series on various aspects of Paleo-Slavonic studies, literature, and linguistics. Under Vavřínek's leadership, the institute organized several conferences, including the Institute of Slavonic Studies, its past, present, and future, in November 1998. President Václav Havel accepted patronage over the event and sent one of his collaborators to read the welcoming speech. On a scholarly level, Vladimír continued his inquiry into the primary sources referencing the Cyrillo-Methodian missions. Among others, he rejected the hypothesis claiming that Constantine had learned Latin in Crimea. He studied the practice of calling baptized Slavonic rulers the new Constantines, and, considering the place of the Cyrillo-Methodian mission between Byzantium and the Latin West, highlighted its church political aspect. To promote Byzantine studies in the Czech and Slavonic environment, Vavřínek, along with his colleagues, wrote a popular history of Byzantium in Czech, which we do not have here, but we have here a history of Greece. Several institutions lauded his work. In 2005, he received an honorary medal from the Konstantin Preslavsky University of Schumann, and in the following year, he was awarded the prestigious Medal of Josef Hlavka. The list of his accolades gradually lengthened. In 2006, he received the Medal of Josef Dobrovský, and in 2011, the University of Schumann bestowed on him the title Doctor Honoris Causa for his lifelong scientific contribution to Cyrillo-Methodian studies. In 2010, Vavřínek organized a conference in Prague titled Ekphrasis, La représentation des monuments dans la littérature byzantine et Byzantine Slav, along with Paolo Odorico, where he formulated his ideas about the formation of early Slavonic culture. The year 2013 marked the 750th anniversary of the arrival of Constantine and Methodius in Great Moravia. It was a full and notably successful year for Vavřínek, who helped organize a conference dedicated to this event in the village of Melichar, close to the location where the apostles to the Slavs presumably lived and worked. With the help of Lodě Kaluška, Vladimír organized an exhibit on Great Moravia, which gradually made the rounds of various Czech cities, and he gave a total of 13 lectures on Constantine and Methodius. His monograph with the title Cyril and Methodius Between Constantinople and Rome became a bestseller practically overnight. In this detailed study, Vavřínek, always the master storyteller, wrote in full the account of the Cyrillo-Methodian mission, to which he had dedicated his scholarly life. In September 2015, Vavřínek organized the symposium Francis Dvorník, a scholar and his work, in Vila Lana, honoring the 40th anniversary of the great scholar's death. 2 years later, he concluded his scholarly writings with a paper in Byzantine Slavica titled The Puzzle of the Cyrillo-Methodian Mission, which summarized his ideas and his life work. In 2018, he lost his beloved wife, Hannah. Despite his health problems, he narrated his life story for Radio Vltava, and he concluded his memoirs with a characteristic optimism. I did not live my life in vain, and I enjoyed living it. Although Vavřínek only rarely came to the Institute in his latter years, his colleagues visited and called him frequently. A kind and caring man, he never forgot to ask how they were doing, was invariably interested in their work, putting his vast bibliographical and practical knowledge at their disposal, and inquired after their children and families. Right up until the end, he was interested in what was happening at the Institute, to which he gradually donated his valuable library of several hundred volumes on Byzantine and Slavonic studies. In his final months, he moved to a care home where, on 8th of July 2024, he held his last lecture on Cyril and Methodius. On 14th of August, he died in his sleep. His last words to his daughter were, "I had a happy life."